Hey Luke, it's your dad again. Today I wanted to talk about a frightening experience that happened to me whenever I was a child. And it's actually a story that I haven't shared with very many people in my life. And I wanted to more fully explain why I want to share this frightening experience with you. I want to explain that as the video would come to its end. But basically, I remember one night whenever I was a child. I believe I was in high school. I can't remember if it was junior or senior high, but I guess more probably it would have been around senior high school. I remember that I fell asleep one night in my parents' basement on the couch. And I remember that I was probably having a scary dream before the experience happened, but I can't remember what that dream was. And even as time has passed, the experience itself has faded, and I have few visual memories of it in my mind. But I do remember that I was probably having a scary dream, I guess something that you would term a nightmare. And as the dream was coming to its end, I remember that I was trying to move. I wanted to get up, I wanted to get out of the scary dream, and I could not move. Now, this was not the first time that a dream like that happened to me, because I do remember other times in my life when I had nightmares, and I remember wanting to wake up or wanting to move, and I couldn't feel like I could move until I finally opened my eyes. And then whenever I opened my eyes, I was able to move, and I was able to feel the relief of, oh, it was just a dream. But on this particular night, I remember wanting to wake up out of this dream, and again, I have no recollection of what that dream was, but I do remember it was stressing me, and I remember I wasn't able to move, and I did manage to open my eyes. And while I believe that my eyes were fully opened, I remember seeing a being who was sitting on my chest. If I were to describe what the being looked like, I would say it was human-shaped. It looked like an adult human. Its color was a whitish blue. I guess you would say it would be the color of what you would think an angel might be. If an angel could somehow appear to someone, you would picture them as like a self-luminous whitish blue color. And this being did seem to be a little self-luminous, like he was very faintly generating his or its own light as he was sitting on me. But this being obviously did not come across as an angel, because he seemed to be sitting on my chest, and I remember whenever I woke up, I could feel the weight. Before my eyes opened, I actually felt the weight of something pressing on my chest. And I open my eyes, and I see this blue humanoid being sitting on my chest, and he has his arms out, and his arms are actually reaching out and grabbing around my neck. Now, at the time, I didn't feel like I was actually being strangled. I didn't feel like I was being choked. But I do remember that not only could I not move my arms or legs, like my entire body was completely paralyzed, but I felt the weight of it sitting on my chest, and I also could not breathe. I was struggling. I wanted to get a breath, and I thought I was going to suffocate to death, and that this blue humanoid being was going to somehow take my life. Now, again, other than the fact that it looked like a humanoid figure, the only thing I can remember about this bluish-white humanoid being sitting on my chest, reaching out his arms and, perhaps strangling me, was that he was faceless. He had the head of what looked like a man, but he had no eyes, no nose, no mouth. It was a completely faceless being. And of course, I just remember being absolutely terrified, and I remember thinking, why am I seeing this being on me and my eyes are open? If this is a dream, it's over. I already opened my eyes. It should be over. This being I should not be seeing before my opened eyes. And the length of time that I saw this being was maybe no more than 10 seconds. But finally, I just tried to use all of my willpower to will this being away from me. And he vanished. He disappeared. And I was able to move, and I was able to get up. And I remember thinking right after this happened, I thought, okay, was this fully a dream? I wanted to convince myself that it was completely a dream. But I couldn't get over the strange fact as to why did I actually see this being with my eyes opened. Now, admittedly, my eyes had only been opened for no more than maybe 10 seconds after I woke up. So I was sort of in like a half-awake, half-sleep phase, and I thought, well, maybe that could be why I saw this being. But it was just hard for me to convince myself that it was just a dream because it just felt so real. I could feel the weight of it sitting on my chest. I could feel the inability to breathe. I certainly couldn't move, and what seemed to be my opened eyes were looking at this being before it finally disappeared. Now again, this happened in the basement in my parents' house where I lived and grew up. And growing up in that house over the years, never had anything like that ever happened, and never had anything like it ever happened again. This was a one-time strange experience that terrified me, that frightened me, that I could not explain, and I didn't even feel comfortable sharing it with anybody because I was afraid of what they might think. Now, chances are a lot of people probably would have just said, well, it was just a nightmare and you were in the half-awake, half-asleep time when you saw this being, and somehow, even though your eyes were open, you were still asleep enough or not awake enough that that's why your mind was generating it. And chances are I do agree with that explanation, especially now that I've actually looked into what was likely the cause of this experience. But either way, I didn't want to tell anybody about it because I was afraid of what they would say or what they would think. And I didn't try to look into the matter. I didn't try to investigate it. I just kept this horrible memory to myself. But it was a short time afterwards, or maybe even a few years. I can't remember how long I waited. But I finally managed to tell my best friend Luke. And so I did share the story with him, and I believe whenever I shared the story with him, it was in senior high. So that's why I know that the incident had to have happened before senior high, but I can't remember how long I actually waited before I told my best friend Luke about the story. So if I was, a junior or senior in high school when I told him, that could have been around the time that it happened, or maybe I had waited longer before I told him the story. I'm not entirely sure. Well, anyway, after I told that story to Luke, it was literally about 10 or 11 years later that one day he sends me an email. And he says, "Hey, Ben, do you remember that story you told me about 10 years ago of that, being on you whenever you were asleep? I just happened to randomly stumble upon an internet article that seems to explain your experience. It seems that you had an episode of sleep paralysis." And so he showed me the Wikipedia article that explained sleep paralysis, and whenever I was reading it, it sort of gave me a lot of comfort, because that event did traumatize me for a while. I can't say it traumatized me all that much. Probably within a week or so after it happened, I hadn't really thought about it much anymore. But I had never really gotten closure. I had never really gotten an explanation as to, well, why did I experience that? What was the cause of it? Was there some actual being that visited that house just one night, picked on me for some inexplainable reason, or was it something else? And so I'm reading this article on sleep paralysis, and it says, sleep paralysis is when, during awakening or falling asleep, a person is aware but unable to move or speak. And as I'm reading that, I'm thinking, okay, well, yeah, that definitely was my situation, because I was, during the awakening, I was waking up rather than falling asleep, and I was unable to move or speak. But surely, that can't just explain away my experience, because there was an actual sight of this being that was causing me to not be able to move, that was causing pressure on my chest, that was seemingly using its arms and hands to make me unable to breathe. Well, then, the article goes on to explain further. The experience may include seeing something such as a supernatural creature which suffocates or terrifies the individual, accompanied by a feeling of pressure on one's chest and difficulty breathing. Now, when I'm reading that, I'm thinking, whoa, it's almost as if the person who wrote this article interviewed me. Or they didn't interview me, but they obviously interviewed a lot of other people that have had a similar experience. And after reading that article, I was almost thinking, well, maybe I'm finally finding closure on this ridiculous experience that I couldn't fully explain. I couldn't understand why it happened to me. When it happened to me, it traumatized me for a while. I never got closure. I never got an explanation as to what it was, and yet maybe, the people that investigate this sleep paralysis are finally giving me my closure, finally explaining why this happened to me. It also said it is usually accompanied by intense emotions such as fear and panic. That was certainly my emotions at the time. I remember thinking, is this thing going to kill me? Is this the end? Why is this happening? But am I going to die right here on my parents' couch in their basement, and maybe they'll find me dead and they won't even know what happened, because some being somehow took my life, and maybe didn't even leave good explanation as to how I actually died. So after reading that, I am thinking, okay, this sleep paralysis thing seems to have been what happened. I don't know why it happens to so many people, but it's obviously a genuine phenomenon that has happened to a lot of people, and that was a phenomenon that happened to me. If you further look into the sleep paralysis phenomenon, the people that have investigated it have come up with possible causes as to why it might happen, and one of those possible causes is sleep deprivation. And whenever I read that, I'm thinking, that may have been why this happened to me. Because, again, I can't remember exactly what age I was whenever this experience happened, but no matter what, I was definitely asleep on my parents' couch in their basement while I was still going to high school, because I definitely know I told my friend the story while I was in senior high school. So I'm trying to think back, why would I have been sleeping on their couch whenever I had my own bedroom? I had my own bed that I could sleep in. And thinking back to that time in my life, I remember, well, there were many nights where I chose to stay up late playing video games, and I would play video games in that TV room where, the rest of the family was sleeping upstairs, so I wouldn't wake them, but I would stay up until the wee hours of the morning and play video games, and then maybe not fall asleep until the early hours of the morning. chances are that's what I had done that very night. I had probably spent an entire night playing video games, and if I was doing that, it was also probably during a time of my life whenever I was working at McDonald's, because I do remember thinking back that it was a habit of mine whenever I started working at McDonald's, which was in the summer of my after my junior year of high school, that I began working at McDonald's. And I would usually, if it was during the summer, I would work late at McDonald's, not get home until late, and then I would stay up late, and then I would fall asleep after, staying up real late, and then I would wake up in the morning and not get caught up on sleep. I mean, during the junior and senior years of my high school, I do remember was a time of my life whenever I did not get much sleep. I would only sleep for about 5.5 or 6 hours a night, because of either working at McDonald's, or that was also a time whenever I had a lot of homework and I was in a lot of activities. So that was a time of my life when I was very sleep deprived. It wasn't just one night of, oh, I stayed up late. That was a regular time of my life when I was not getting much sleep, and it seems that it finally caught up to me. I had this episode of sleep paralysis because I had deprived myself of sleep. So that seemed to even further confirm, wow, that was an experience of sleep paralysis. The cause was probably my sleep deprivation that I had done to myself by not only taking on so many activities and doing so much work at that time, but even willfully staying up late, either watching movies or playing video games. Now, the article further says that the condition is common and generally not serious. And then the Wikipedia article actually references over 30 different studies that tried to look into how common this experience is. And I was shocked because it seems like more than 30 different studies have tried to see about how many people in the population does this kind of experience affect. The lowest figure that certain studies came up with is that 1 out of every 10 people of the general population will experience sleep paralysis at least one time in their life. And the other studies gave higher percentages. Some gave as high as 50%. 1 out of every 2 people will at least have one experience of sleep paralysis in their life. Now, to me, I think that percentage seems a bit high. But the lowest percentage that was given was 1 out of every 10 people. So whenever you look around yourself, how many groups of 10 people do you know? According to these studies, at least one person out of every 10 will have had a horrible experience like this. And yet, with all of the people I've known in my life, no one else has ever said that they've had a kind of experience like this. And so I wonder, how many people do I know who have had a horrifying experience like this, and maybe they were like me and they thought, well, I don't want to share it with anybody because I'm afraid of what they're going to think. And I don't want to share it for that reason, and yet it seems to be a very common thing that happens to a good chunk of people. Even if 10% or 1 out of every 10 people isn't a high number, that's still a good chunk of people that it happens to. And I bet a lot of them that have happened to it haven't tried to search for the answer to it, haven't tried to seek an explanation, haven't tried to get closure. But, knowing that it is a genuine thing, knowing that it can happen, knowing that for some reason it is accompanied very many times by a supernatural creature suffocating the individual, putting pressure on one's chest and difficulty breathing, that's exactly what that being did to me. It was calm to look into this and get this explanation. So the main reason why I did want to share this story with you, not only to let you know more about me, know more about certain things that have happened in my life that have shaped my views, that have shaped how I approach life and look at the world, but the important thing is that if anything bad were to ever happen to you, I would hope that you would be able to share it with someone. That if there are not only bad experiences that happen in your life not caused by another human being, but that if there are bad experiences in your life caused by another human being, that you would never be afraid to try to reach out, to try to ask someone, to try to share it, and get help for it, because, you know, unfortunately we do live in a world where there are bad things that happen, and there are bad people who make things happen. And it's unfortunate that a lot of people live in the fear of just talking about it because they're afraid of what others might think if they talk about it, when really if they reach out to the right people and talk about it, they might be able to get help. So I also want to recommend to you that you don't allow yourself to be sleep deprived. Hopefully you do get regular night's sleep. You know, just in general, losing sleep is not a healthy thing, but I do believe that that's what caused me to have a traumatic experience like this that seemed like more than a nightmare. More than just a scary dream. It seemed like a strange, unexplainable incident that happened, and yet it seems like it was largely brought upon the fact that I hadn't gotten a lot of sleep. So definitely get a lot of sleep. I hope you're safe. I hope you make good life choices, and no matter what, you know, no matter what horrible things that happen to any of us in this life, thank God we have our God looking over us. Thank God we have a Savior, His Son, who died on the cross for us, who bore our griefs and our sorrows, who we can trust. By trusting in that, by trusting in Him and all that He has done for us, that is what gives us hope. That is what gives us assurance and peace. And, you know, I still pray that you do know the Lord Jesus as your Savior, that you know the God who will protect you from any of the harms in this life, who will give you the strength and wisdom to overcome any negative factors that are happening to you or that will happen to you in this life, and who will help see you through it. I do remember after that horrible experience, you know, largely the reason why I don't think it traumatized me too much was because I prayed to God about it, that He protected me from whatever it was, that it would never happen again, and thankfully He has answered my prayer. Unfortunately, it does seem that there are many people who not only have one incident of sleep paralysis, but it repeats for them, and I would pray for those people. Thankfully, it has only ever happened once to me, and I do pray that it would never happen again, because it's hard to separate whatever it is from reality. It's really hard to deal with it, especially depending on how severe it is. But in any case, that's my frightening experience that I wanted to share with you. I do hope that you are doing well in your life now. I hope that you are doing well in your life when you see this video. And I hope that you will one day be reaching out to me, and we will begin to reconcile our relationship and begin to form a relationship which was taken away from us, which we were not able to form, unfortunately. So, till next time, I love you, and take care.